I've never actually seen someone get folded like a lawn chair, dude. What the fuck? I'm Abner. Here we break down and sometimes roast the most chaotic nights in combat sports. And this ain't no different. Alright, Misfits 22 just happened. And now we have Darren Till, whose KO might have crowned him the king of Misfits. And then we have a controversial stoppage. And then we have the quickest submission ever. But before going in too deep, here's why Misfits 22 actually matters. Alright, so first we have ex-UFC stars headlining. We have influencer boxers. And then we have the first ever MMA bout in Misfits. So this wasn't the typical influencer chaos that we're used to. It was a full-on crossover circus. But boy, this event has some pretty good moments to it. I can't even lie. The event took place in Manchester, as you might have guessed by hearing KSI commentate. Misfits is one of those events that thrive on viral moments. And in this particular event, we got 3. Okay, so the main event, Darren Till versus Luke Rockhold, was an interesting one. Darren Till, if you're not familiar, 32, former UFC welterweight title challenger, who left the UFC in order to reinvent himself in the world of Misfits. This year so far, he's 3-0. And then we have Luke Rockhold, a 40-year-old, also ex-UFC, and also Strikeforce middleweight champion. He retired from the UFC back in 2022, where he suffered some brutal losses. Then he tried his hand at bare knuckle boxing, lost, and then even dabbled in karate combat. And now Misfits 22 marks his boxing debut. So Luke actually looked pretty sharp for most of round 1. He landed some clean shots. He showed his athleticism, even for being 40. But in the closing seconds of that round, dude, he got caught. Till's left hand smashed him into the canvas, ultimately being saved by the bell. And then Luke gets up and walks into the wrong corner. At that point, who doesn't think he has a concussion? Round 2 begins, and then Darren Till does what he does. He goes for another knockdown, which the ref missed initially for some reason. Very odd. And Luke's corner, instead of throwing in the towel, they just let him keep backing up. He wasn't even clinching. Round 3 comes along, and things take an even worse turn for Luke. Till corners him by the ropes. He unleashes a violent combo, and then he basically drops him with the right hand. And again, I had no idea it was possible to actually fold like a lawn chair. That was genuinely brutal, dude. I couldn't even imagine what his family must have felt at that moment. And yeah, everybody's saying it. It's great that Luke wants to keep fighting, but at this point, another concussion, another time he's been unconscious. It's time for you to hang it up. And to wrap this matchup, Darren Till decides to call out Golf Rock, which I guess we'll see. I'm not entirely sure how to feel about that matchup. But let's switch gears to talk about Tony Ferguson versus Saul Papi, the match that I was personally excited to see. Of course, you know who Tony Ferguson is. He's 41 now, UFC legend, known for intense pressure. But there were lots of doubts of him coming into this fight, as he was coming off an 8-fight losing streak stemming back from 2019. And so, he's making his boxing debut against Saul Papi, a 31-year-old influencer boxer, who I think he's actually pretty decent. For round 1, I think it was pretty clear that it went to Saul Papi actually. We saw him showboat a few times, knowing he was landing the cleaner punches. But then round 2 comes along, and then we see Tony starting to find his rhythm. He's increasing his volume, and Saul Papi did land some of the heavier shots, but you could see that his gas tank was starting to drain quite a bit. And then round 3 comes along, the moment that we've all been waiting for, a glimpse to see the Tony Ferguson of old. And then he applies the pressure, pinning Saul Papi on the ropes, and then he unleashes a 15-punch combo that goes unanswered. Saul Papi basically just tries to shell up, but you can see some of the shots actually going across, or I should say around his guard, actually landing cleanly, and that's when the ref stops it. Now, some people think that it was stopped prematurely. Looking back at how that played out, I think there's a good case for that, right? I don't think a full-on stoppage was necessary. I think a standing 8 count would have been more appropriate. But if Misfits in the ref we're looking for an opportunity to get the crowd riled up, hyped up, that was definitely a good moment to do that. But yeah, some fans are definitely furious about the early stoppage. Papi himself says that he didn't feel hurt, that he wanted to continue the fight. But it was actually pretty great to see. Tony Ferguson got emotional. We can see him go on his knees, start crying. I've heard talks that Tony maybe could face Slim in a boxing match, or maybe even Dillon Danis in an MMA match. But of course, we hear that Papi does want a rematch. We'll see what happens. I think any of these routes would be pretty interesting. And I wasn't even sure if I wanted to bring up the fight between Dillon Danis and Warren Spencer, considering it was such a letdown. The thing lasted literally 15 seconds or less. Yeah, Dillon Danis, 31 years old, black belt in jiu-jitsu, a former 2-0 Bellator fighter, known for trolling online, but has legitimate grappling skills. And then we have Warren Spencer, known more for boxing, but for some reason in his MMA debut, he decides to go straight into a grappling situation with a black belt in jiu-jitsu nonetheless. Basically, this fight plays out in a few words. Dillon throws an overhand, Spencer panics, goes in for the clinch, Danis instantly locks the guillotine, and Spencer taps. That's it. That's the whole fight. I guess you could say it was short, but fun.
Dillon Danis, he cinches it up like a vice grip. It doesn't take very...
But then the big man himself, Eddie Hall, jumps into the ring and calls out Dillon Danis. And of course, the crowd loved the circus, as did I.
We just mentioned Dillon Danis. Didn't you just face off with Dillon?
Yeah, so that motherfucker said on camera, shook hands, if I get under 300 pounds, we can fight. He agreed to that.
Oh, really? Mate, we will make that happen.
Can we get a shake on it?
We will happily make
I've
that
got
happen.
64 pounds to lose.
Okay.
Give me 12 weeks, I'll lose it.
Oh, sick. All right, on the treadmill.
Yeah.
But I think this event gave Misfits quite a legitimacy boost, right? We have the crazy KO. We have an emotional comeback of a UFC legend. Although it did have its misses, I think it did bring in more mainstream attention than anything. So even if you don't consider it real boxing or real MMA, I think a good way to see this, it's combat entertainment, right? Which, who doesn't love that? So that's Misfits 22, chaos everywhere, but some unforgettable moments. And speaking of crazy shit, you've got to see when Wade from the Weight Concept sparred Dillon Danis. That video made me change my mind as to how I see Dillon Danis, from just an online troll to someone with some actual skill. It's in my video called "This Part Changed the Way I See Dillon Danis." Go check that out. It's an interesting watch, and I'll catch you next time.